Hi everyone, this is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm going to do a couple of birth chart demonstrations for you, just demonstrating more simple techniques that you can use while you are learning to read charts from home. I know there are a lot of people out there who are self-educating online the best that you can, reading books, things like that. Maybe you can't afford it or don't have the time to take a class. So I try to make some of my content available to people that usually I would reserve for, say, my full 1-2 year or Horary apprenticeship courses, and make some helpful tips available to people who watch my channel. So in the meantime, if you are, by the way, if you are interested, all the way until the end of June, we're still allowing people to enroll for my course, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. We started 2 weeks ago. It's going really well. It's an awesome group of people. So not too late to join that if you want to. So I'm going to look at a birth chart today and a horary chart. And we're actually going to start with the birth chart. I'm just going to show you a few simple techniques. So let me put this up. All right, so here is a chart on the screen. Thanks to my client for allowing us to take a look at it together. This is someone who came in actually for a live client reading in one of my classrooms, and she allowed us for her to be she was a guinea pig for all of us as we were studying. So really nice of her. Now, when you're first taking in a chart, one of the things that helps is to use a simple analogy of that I like to use for the three main symbols in a chart, which not always, but typically are going to be the sun and the moon, and then the rising sign or the ruler of the ascendant or planets on the ascendant. Any of those planets can be a really good indicator of a person's character and personality. So here's the analogy that I use, and it's really simple, and you've probably heard me use it before, but let's refresh and just show you how it worked out in this chart. So the first layer of is in this analogy that I use is that the sun represents the plot line. It's not who you are, it's what you do. Just like the sun is a path of motion in the sky, a big arc, our lives move along the arc of a storyline, and the sun tells us about that storyline. And one of the most important things you need to focus on is the house location. It'll give you a lot of information about the themes involved with the life story. The second thing that's really important is going to be the moon, and that is the environment. If there's a plot line, like a love story, and it's taking place, in ancient China, it's very different than if it's taking place in, the current modern day America, or if it's taking place in medieval Europe or the Renaissance or something like that. So the setting means a great deal, and the moon is going to describe the setting. The setting is a very elaborate, vast symbol, actually, of the moon that the moon represents. So the body, heredity, genetics, ancestry, the family, socioeconomic status of the family, in a certain sense, the inborn elements of your body and bodily health, as well as temperament. So it's environmental conditions and circumstances in life. You could also think of the plot line like the destination that the ship is moving toward, and the moon is like the wind, waves, and weather that you'll encounter along the way. And then the very simple meaning of the ascendant, planets on the ascendant or the ascendant ruler, is going to the sign or the planetary ruler, mostly the planetary ruler, is going to be the character. Who's the actual character going through all of this? So let me show you how I use this analogy to break down this chart. This is someone who I didn't know at all, didn't know anything about her, and just so that people know. And it came out really accurately. So we start off by saying, look, you got the sun in the 9th house in a daytime chart. It's like the president of your chart. The plot line is going to be very important in your life. It's going to take you through the 9th house. 9th house is traditionally called God. It was called the joy of the sun. It's a very good environment for the sun to be in because it's very naturally happy in this place for reasons that I can't unpack right now, but shameless pitch, come study in my Hellenistic astrology course. You'll learn more about that for sure. The 9th house is a place of higher education, religion and mysticism, spirituality, foreign countries, long journeys. It's also a place that's associated with law and the rule of law, whether it's cosmic or scientific or karmic. So the sun in the 9th house, your life is going to move through this area of higher education, law, religion, etc. Very important. Now, that's the first part. The second part, the environment. The environment, now you can take a lot more considerations. You can take a lot more things into consideration. For example, in this analysis, I also included the fact that the sun was the ruler of the midheaven, that Jupiter was in the sun's sign in the 10th house, in the 10th place. And so I included a lot more, but I'm just keeping it simple for this video, just so that you get the basic ideas down. And oftentimes starting simpler is going to be more effective anyway. So then we go to the moon. The moon is in the 2nd house, which is a sign of the environment being tinged with concerns about money, finances, self-sufficiency, earning. What can I grow and how can I be self-sufficient? Those are a few basic things that the moon in the 2nd house can indicate. And something that I threw in because you can't help but notice it right away, which is that the moon is disposed of by Jupiter in the 10th, a sign of great independence, strength, maybe even working for prominent people or making money due to high status in the society or due to working closely with high status people or institutions and probably doing well financially. However, it is a theme, environmental concern, in part because of the opposition that the moon holds to Venus and Mercury in the 8th house, which is going to be associated with partners' wealth and partners' money. So those are the main environmental conditions that I saw. Now, again, I'm keeping this really simple. There was more to it than this, but just so that you can see how ridiculously simple this technique can be. Then you go to the ascendant ruler. Well, you've got Saturn on the ascendant, so the character might be Saturnine. But the ruler is also Mars, who is in its fall in the 9th house in Cancer. Okay, so maybe a Martial and Saturnine combination of personality traits. So what would that be? Well, with Mars, the ruler in the 9th house, you either have people who fight on behalf of higher ideals, laws, truth, religious beliefs, like a soldier or something like that, or a fighter or a kind of missionary or visionary or crusader, or you tend to have individuals who have really incisive analytical skills. Mars is the planet of cutting, and in Cancer, especially in the 9th house, research into chemistry, the body, the natural or biological things with a kind of almost like the scalpel of a surgeon or someone dissecting. Remember when I was a kid, this is kind of gross now that I think about it. We had to dissect frogs. Poor frogs, But anyway, you think of people who might be researching and analyzing things with Mars in the 9th house as well. And that can actually cover a pretty wide territory. It can be associated with math, science, chemistry, all sorts of things. Even like culinary science could be Mars and Cancer in the 9th house. So anyway, those were some of the character traits in addition to like serious, stoic, mature, grave, capable, responsible, but maybe also dealing with either depression or anxiety with Saturn on the ascendant. Saturn can create either of those stressors in a person's health. Okay, so that's it. That's the treatment. Character, setting, plot. Those are the three things that make up the story. You could ask, what is the deeper purpose of this story? And that might be, in some ways, there could be some sense of needing to fight for something that one believes in, research something that one is very deeply passionate about, and also the need to be self-sufficient and maybe to overcome certain limiting beliefs or doubts about themselves, especially through the exercise of their mind and through the ability to earn money in the world. Those are some of the different things that the soul comes in kind of with an agenda about. Now, any of these things are also spiritualized and transformed greatly by our free will and by a spiritual lifestyle that we live, and our karma can change. So this is just the rough outline that you kind of start with, let's say. So what was this individual's story? Well, this individual, hold on just a second, grab my notes. So this person spent a long stint of their life. They're basically like two very long blocks of their professional life. And the first one was as a research analyst in a hospital, for a hospital, specifically with regard to the labor and delivery and maternity, like ward or wing of the hospital, I guess you'd call it. And so they did a lot. They were an analyst, research analyst that dealt with women in pregnancy, and I thought that was brilliant, right? They also ended up later in life being a statistical research analyst in the state police department. So they ended up doing just statistical research into all different kinds of things, a lot of which had to do with, I believe, the financial end of things in the police department. But at any rate, long career as a research analyst with the ninth house. And for a big portion of that, it was specifically to do with labor delivery, women, very Cancerian things. So they also worked for executives with Jupiter in that 10th house. Actually, let me bring it back up so you can still see it while I'm going over this. It's probably helpful to see it again. So let's just refresh on that. So they had, again, there's Mars and the Sun in the ninth. So there's that research and ninth house trajectory of higher education, learning, research, higher degrees that they held, and so forth. Cancerian lunar element, of course, involves the topic of women in labor and pregnancy and things like that, that they were a research analyst of that. Mars in the ninth is that more martial element where you get something like the police department, but they were still research and data specialist, and some to do with the budget as well and money. Now, remember that these are ruled by the moon, who is in the house of finances. So at some point, their career also involves research and data analysis that has mostly to do with the budget of the state police, if I remember correctly. So anyway, that was just part of what made their chart really, unique. And of course, they worked for higher ups, both in the hospital and in the police force, that Jupiter in Leo, the high authority. So really in an environment surrounded by, very highly authoritative sort of Jupiter and Leo personalities. And of course, they did well in their career, as we thought. Now, she definitely dealt with anxiety, and in particular, panic attacks have been a lifelong theme and struggle that she's dealt with. And so we got that right with Saturn on the ascendant. And then also, what was so interesting about this was you have the moon in the second house. And we said the environment will have something to do with self-sufficiency and the concern about finances and, kind of earning your own way in the world. Usually what planets in the second house, especially the luminaries, will have something to, they'll point toward that. Then we said this may come through some kind of opposition around the spouse and spouse's money, with Venus, ruler of the seventh house of marriage, and the eighth house of spouse's finances. And sure enough, this person was a single mother, single parent, who raised a lot of children. I'll keep some of the details private, but raised a bunch of kids and did it on their own, and divorced their husband specifically because they believed that, husband was not pulling his weight. Husband was not, didn't have a job, was not contributing, kind of described as a bit of a deadbeat. And so she left him, was on her own, raised a bunch of kids, got the education, got the promotions, did really well, but raised a lot of kids and was very financially self-sufficient. And part of this was also about, the conversation that we had was also like, look, you got Saturn on the ascendant, all that responsibility that was on you. And one of the questions that we had in our session was, what happens in later life when kids are out of the house, you're retired, and there's no more the weight of being a parent and having to be so intensely responsible, and there's no longer the the burdens of work and a lot of intense obligation and duty at work as well. And there was a lot more to this reading, but admittedly, she said, I'm just trying to figure out like who I am when I'm not bearing the weight of so much responsibility. Huge theme in her chart with Saturn right on the ascendant, part of the character struggle that is working through. She's got to find a way of doing ninth house things, perhaps in retirement, that aren't just about trying to be that, provider for a bunch of kids, and trying to be, not necessarily think about being the, the responsible one with a lot of weight and burden on her professionally and personally. So the ninth house sun, maybe we'll give her the time to pursue her spiritual interests and spiritual life a little bit more, studies that she is maybe more interested in personally. Right. So these are some of the things that can spin off from such observations. The conversation opens up from here. This is not all there is to a reading. And this is also a very pared down version of the analysis of each part of the reading. But those things are good starting places: sun, moon, rising, plotline, environment, character. And from there, you can learn a lot. Start with your own chart, obviously, and practice with it and try to stick to house meanings. You'll notice I don't pay a ton of attention to the signs. That's because in ancient astrology, planets and houses are probably the loudest speakers in the chart. Signs are really facilitating the relationship between planets and places through rulerships, through essential and accidental dignities. So that's a little, just a little lesson that hopefully you find useful. All right, I'm going to show you a horary chart next. Now, and thank you to my client for letting us, just being so helpful. She helped out in our classroom and in the live classroom, and then here on YouTube as well. So we're going to go back to Will We Conceive a Child? This is a pregnancy horary that I did back in 2016 that ended up positive. So let me show you this one. And I'll try to show you how I got there as well. So in this particular horary, the person asking is always ruling the ascendant ruler. A horary chart is a chart cast for the moment that a question is asked, and it's cast from the time that it's asked from the location of the astrologer, the one reading the chart. So in that case, the querent is the ascendant ruler, Saturn. And this is a woman asking if she'll get pregnant. She'll conceive a child. And so she also gets the moon. That's her co-signifier. And then the fifth house ruler is going to be the pregnancy, and that's Venus. So what we want to see is an aspect between the moon or Saturn and Venus. And we see it in two different ways. The first and most immediate way is that the moon is applying to what is called a contra antitia with Venus. It's a kind of an obscure type of aspect. Let me try to explain it to you really briefly. Contra antitia and antitia are formed between signs that are equal distance, signs and degrees of signs that are equal distant from the equinoxes or solstices. So for example, the moon at 24 Gemini is at the same distance from the summer solstice as is, say, a planet at 6 Cancer. You can always tell because the planets on either side will add up to 30. And the signs that create antitias are going to be like this. Here, I'll show you. So we'll use Cancer as like I'm just using the sign right here as the dividing line. And you're going to have, Cancer and Gemini. And then you go out, you got Taurus and Leo, and then Virgo and Aries. These signs, if planets are in these signs and add up to 30, they have an antitia. Now, contra antitias are built around the equinoxes. And what they mean, by the way, an antitia, is that the planets at those degrees that add up to 30 on signs equal distance from the solstice point, that the planets at these places will have an equal amount of light and darkness in the 24-hour period, an equal amount of light in the 24-hour period. So they have a secretive form of conjunction between them. I use this technique, for example, to predict that there was potentially someone of greater magnitude or stature, a leader, or maybe even a sports figure who would die or be involved in a scandal, tragedy, or accident or something like that last fall. And that was right about a week before Kobe Bryant died, right at the time that antitia was forming. So they're very effective transits to look at predictively. And in horary, of course, a contra antitia is going to be formed around the equinox points. You're doing the same thing from Aries, and you're going equal distance on either side of those points. You've got Pisces and Aries, and then you've got Aquarius and Taurus, and then you've got Gemini and Capricorn. So you can see Gemini and Capricorn here. Here they are, 5 degrees and 24 degrees. So they're forming into that. They're about to add up to 30 collectively, which you can take down to the minute, actually. And that means that there is an aspect between the moon, our querent, the woman asking the question, and Venus, the ruler of the 5th house of pregnancy, which means she's about to conceive. Contra antitia isn't the loudest signature in the world, but it was so imminent and so close, and really, in a sense, any aspect will do. So when it comes to just, will I get pregnant? If there's a swift, uninterrupted aspect, I'm a little weary of contra antitias and oppositions because they sometimes speak to difficulties. But in this case, the querent did get pregnant as predicted and carried. So that is just a brief example of a pregnancy horary that worked out. Now, oftentimes people will ask me, like if I see a pregnancy, horary that's not going to work out, what do you say? Meaning well, it doesn't look like you're going to get pregnant. That's maybe not the hardest news in the world to deliver. But let's say that it says you are going to get pregnant, but it looks like it might be difficult. Well, typically speaking, it's very hard, in my experience, to see exactly what's going to go wrong. And as someone who saw my wife through, two um, births and two pregnancies and everything, things come up that aren't always easy. Like sometimes some women get a lot sicker than others. Some women have to go on bed rest for a while. Sometimes there's a C-section. Like lots of different things can happen. So if a chart says, yeah, it might be rocky, it's almost better not to say, right? Because it in all likelihood, it's not going to be a miscarriage. It's been in 10 years of doing, or I guess in horary, about 6 years of doing this, that I've seen only a few miscarriages in horaries. And usually, it's like the signs of the difficulty that are there are not necessarily, it's not like you can just go look and go like, oh yeah, that's death. Now, if someone specifically has had many miscarriages and they get pregnant again, they're like, I've been through so many miscarriages, I've had a few before, I really want to know in advance. And it's a little different situation where I might look more at the questions being asked differently. But if someone just says, am I going to get pregnant? I like to keep it to yes, you will, and may the gods be with you. So, but yeah. So people always ask me that, like, how do you handle that? And the truth is that it seems my one of my teachers said it seems inhuman, and it is to predict that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my boundary with it. There are certain cases again where if someone has a health history and it's something very serious is going on. I had a friend one time, a personal friend who did a horary with me, and she asked, if she was already pregnant and asked if there would be any complications, and it looked as though there would, and so I told her that, and it ended up being accurate. She carried, but she had to go on bed rest right around the predicted time, and that was like, for me. Like this is a friend, thank God that this is a friend that I could speak to about this kind of stuff. And she was just like, yeah, I almost wish I wouldn't have known. And I was like, yeah, it's probably better for me to sort of have been like, yeah, maybe not the best question to ask, to just like go with it and trust the process, because it really ended up, being more of an anxiety producing thing for her. So that was one lesson for me as a horary reader that I took to heart, and it kind of changed my approach with pregnancy horaries in particular, especially like, at that point in time too. When I did that one, I hadn't had any kids of my own yet, and that really changes things once you know what the anxiety of like, your wife being pregnant is like, or you being pregnant or whatever. So anyway, hopefully this is interesting. Generally speaking, in a horary, will I conceive? You just want to find an aspect between Lord One and the Moon, or ruler of the house one, and the Moon, and the fifth house ruler. Uninterrupted. That's typically unprohibited, as we say. That's what you want to look for. Anyway, simple horary lesson. I know there's a lot of people out there who practice horary. This was kind of a funny one because I really don't like getting to a pregnancy in a chart through contra anticia or oppositions in particular, because sometimes it's kind of like they perfect, but with trouble. Like people have to, sometimes do like IVF, is that what it's called? Or fertility treatment or something like that. And, you tell someone, yeah, you're going to get pregnant. And then they have all these troubles, and they're like, sometimes it'll cause them to be like, astrology's bogus. So, but this one turned out well. It was like, just an immediate contra anticia between the Moon and Venus, the fifth house ruler, and she got pregnant. So, all right. Well, on that note, I hope that you are all doing well. Please leave your comments in the comment section below. Tell me, I'd love to hear your reflections. What did you learn? What was an aha moment for you? And if you have any interesting stories to share about the charts you've been working on, please feel free to leave them in the comment section. All right. Take it easy, everyone.